Hey, hey. I see some of you checking in, which is awesome.
Have you guys eaten yet? Shut up. Go upstairs and have a bagel. Hey, just go have a bagel. Go have a bagel, guys. Please go. You should have something free.
You guys are awesome. I love this. All right. Hey, Claire, I see you. Victoria, hi.
Hi. It looks like I'm looking like over here.
This is very, yeah, I've got my
Move it to the middle.
set up. Yeah, you can, and what you can do is you can choose to mute unless you have a question and then unmute if you're able to figure that out.
Okay.
I did a martial art class last week where I had my dog barking in the background, and those kind of things happen. And actually, this is more of a check-in to make sure everybody can use the technology to let you know that I'm putting stuff up on Moodle. And then we got to figure out our first lecture test, our second lecture test. I also am planning on giving back the graded quizzes to you guys virtually, which means not flashing it up on Zoom. Don't worry, but sending them, trying to scan them and get them back to you. For those of you who have it on your desktop, and if you did really well, then you already have a copy of the quiz, and I can just comment on the things that need corrections. So that is my plan. Now I have podcasts from last semester that I used. And really the chapter 9 is going to focus primarily on the first 2 PowerPoints anyway, for the muscular system. So let me see how many folks are checking in here. All right. Okay, we got someone else as well. Let's see. That's Jonah. Hey, Jonah.
Hey, John.
Ashley, Haley,
No,
Eileen. Oh, we got a full house. We gotta do this more often. I like this. All right. So I'll allow a couple more minutes to for folks to get checked in. I'm not sure how well the session is going to record. So I might also do a backup podcast just in case. Can't have, right? Thank goodness our technology. Is everybody doing okay? You guys doing all right? So I'm glad everybody is doing their safe distancing now, and we've seen this kind of heading towards this all semester long, I think, with all this going on, although nobody anticipated coronavirus. But thankfully, we have our technology. You guys have been Moodling all semester. I did send out a couple emails, so hopefully we've been getting those. Make sure when you correspond via email that you use your Cape Cod EDU address, ideally. I've gotten a couple things through Gmail, and that's managing to get through, but in case there are any viruses that happen, we want to make sure that we absolutely are have that secure network to kind of work through. And also, the other thing I'm practicing with my other classes is using a Moodle Dropbox. So we're going to be, I'll be testing that out with you guys too, and setting it up and seeing how it works so that we don't just rely on email. Most folks can get through Moodle okay. So these PowerPoints are up on Moodle, and actually I went ahead and put the nervous system up for those of you who want to work ahead. Remember that the next test starts with the skin, and then it's going to do cover the bones, the joints, and then the muscles, which we're going to work on this week. And so once again, I've got the first couple set of PowerPoints podcasts up. But if you're looking over the PowerPoints, what you see is that the very beginning of the chapter is an overview. Can you guys see the PowerPoint up on Zoom?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So what you see is a review of the types of muscular tissue. It's the same stuff we did basically in the histology chapter, talking about the comparison between skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. And it's a really nice overview. So once again, just looking at the striations between skeletal and cardiac, seeing that smooth does not have those. Remember that skeletal is the only voluntary type of muscle, and it is multinucleate. Cardiac muscle, remember those things between the cells? Anybody want to unmute and shout it out? That connects them together?
Striation. Related disc.
Yeah, there you go. Some of you might remember that from when you took your quiz in histology in lab. Yeah, and once again, cardiac muscle has that unique property of being interconnected so that the cells can communicate. We'll talk more about that when we get to the cardiovascular system in AP2. And smooth muscle also, there's a big section at the end of the chapter where they devote it to smooth muscle. We cover that in AP2 when we go through things like the digestive system and when we go into the autonomic nervous system a little bit more. So just the basics here. Smooth muscle has no visible striations. It's also muscle that is involuntary, and it actually is the slowest of all the muscles, but we'll elaborate on that later. Really, the majority of the chapter focuses on skeletal muscle. They talk about the properties of muscle: excitability, contractility, extensibility, elasticity. Now, contractility is the unique property that is with our muscle, because most other types of tissue, if you remember, don't contract. Now, if you contract, you have to be able to relax, right? You don't want to stay stuck. That is a sustained contraction is okay to a certain point with skeletal muscle, but you don't want to stay. So you also need the ability to stretch, which is extensibility. And then, just like we've talked about before with elastic fibers, you have to be able to go back to your original shape. And so that's what happens when muscle is at rest. Now, the thing to keep in mind with muscle, and we'll see this later on in the chapter, is that in order for muscle to do what it does, it has to be signaled by the nervous system. And so that excitability is tied in.
Oh, you can talk, my bad. I don't have my
motor neurons are capable of doing that.
I don't think I have my microphone.
They talk about the various important functions of muscles, movement being the main one. What many of you are doing now, you're probably doing it on your sofa or in a nice chair. I hope you're comfy, but maintaining posture and body position. Stabilizing joints is one of the things that I talked about before we went on our break. And that is the fact that muscles, if you strengthen them and tone them, remember how they go across the joint, and they can help stabilize the joint in that way. So sometimes strengthening, let's say, the muscles around the shoulder joint will stabilize the joint and help prevent it from becoming injured as easily. That's one of the benefits of doing that type of training. Generate heat as they contract. Right now, we're not going through any cold spell, at least not here on the Cape. But certainly you move around, you generate heat, and then think about exercising, about how you sweat when you exercise. Now, with the skeletal muscle anatomy, let's go ahead and skip down to figure 9.1, and you see that great picture. And you know, if you've had to do any shopping recently and you've bought any steak, it will look a little bit like that. That's kind of gross, but what you see in figure 9.1 is you see the tendon, which remember is the connective tissue that's dense that connects muscle to bone. And think about the bundling that goes on. That's using the steak reference was kind of referring to that, how it bundles. Your muscle is made up of many, many, many bundles. The outermost connective tissue covering, epimysium. So you see that root word, muscle. And then we see smaller bundles, which is perimysium. That's called a fascicle. I always like to ask that question. And then the deeper, when we get deeper in there and around single muscle cells, it's called endomysium. And so what happens is that the muscle cell, this is the terminology you probably got used to back in histology. The term muscle fiber literally means cell, muscle cell. And so that is a term that you're going to see a lot throughout the chapter when they talk about fibers. They're not talking about like collagen, elastin. They're talking about muscle cells. So any questions so far about like basic anatomy? And then with origin and insertion, those are a couple terms they throw out at you. We learned a little bit about that with joints, because remember, origin is where the muscle attaches to the immovable bone, goes across the joint, and inserts on the bone that's going to do the moving. And they mentioned direct or indirect. Most of the muscles are direct movement, meaning they connect directly to the bone. And then some of them, they have sheets of connective tissue, places like in your abdomen, where we all have our six packs, right? And then if you look down into the microanatomy, so we saw with bigger bundles, we saw mesium, sarco is the prefix. Sarcolemma is the plasma membrane of a muscle fiber or cell. Sarcoplasm is the cytoplasm. And then even the organelles, if you look, are sarcoplasmic reticulum. What is that? Right, your ER. So the key difference here is sarcoplasmic reticulum is going to store calcium. Calcium is going to be stored inside muscles. I always warn you guys that we're going to see lots and lots and lots of calcium throughout the chapter. And here we go again. So check out this figure. This is figure 9.2b. And here is a single muscle cell. What do you notice that's kind of bundled inside there? What organelle do you see between the myofibrils? Anybody got that picture up? It's a little, you can turn on your mic. I can't hear you.
Mitochondria?
Yeah, I knew you guys were talking in the background. There you go. Just one of you is right. Yeah, mitochondria, you're probably still having coffee this morning, right? So, well, not you, but yeah, so mitochondria, why do we need mitochondria in muscle? What does it mean? I'm looking for 3 letters.
ATP.
Thank you, ATP. Everybody got that? So remember that we need energy for movement. We need energy. And so that's why there's mitochondria there. Notice the nuclei, the multinucleate cells here are squished off to the sides. Notice the striations. And now we see they're called dark bands and light bands. So how do you remember which one is the A band and which one is the I band? What is the vowel that is in the word dark? A. What is the vowel that is in the word light? I. So that's how you remember which one is the A band and which one is the I band. The dark band is the A band and the light band is the I band. I love those kind of tools to remember things. So once again, the myofibril is actually even smaller within a single muscle cell. And here's the thing I want you to know, this word right here, sarcomere. So we've seen sarcoplasm, we've seen sarcolemma. The smallest contractile unit of a muscle fiber is a sarcomere. I've asked that for many years as a fill-in-the-blank question, because it's the smallest contractile unit. And what's interesting that picture that we saw that I kind of grossed you out with the muscle that was cut with all those bundles inside it, what happens is the sarcomeres need to contract first, and then when they contract, the myofibrils contract, then the entire muscle fiber contracts, then groups of fibers contract. You can kind of tell where this is going, right? And then the whole muscle will contract. So they mention, they talk about the functional contractile unit and how the sarcomeres align like boxcars of a train. Every semester they come up with new colorful ways of describing it. So here is a sarcomere. And the interesting thing, there's going to be something they're going to talk about called the sliding filament theory. And the idea of a sliding filament is they kind of see where the Z discs are that are upright. And I have my hands in front of me. I don't know if you can see me, if I'm off to the side or not. But what you have is, you imagine your thumbs up in the air and your fingers sticking out facing each other. And if you have a gap in between them, that would be like a zone. And so if you bring your hands together and bring the fingertips together, if you get them to kind of cross over each other, that's what it's like when a muscle contracts. The Z disc gets shorter and the H zone disappears. The term we use for that is, we call it the sliding filament theory. Now, the two key parts of the filament you have seen before: actin and myosin. Now, actin is in figure 9.2D, is actually in blue. It looks like blue beads that are twisted up. And myosin are kind of, they look like, when you get them out individually, they look a little bit like golf clubs maybe, and they have a head to them. They're bundled together. So remember that actin and myosin are going to be the key players here. And what we'll kind of go into a little bit of detail about now is just, oh, here's the picture I wanted you guys to see. So here is the myosin. And truthfully, it looks like there are two golf clubs together with the myosin. And so actin and myosin are going to be the key players here. Remember, these are microfilaments. We learned about these back when we learned about the various structures in the cell, the cytoskeleton, and the various types of structures there. And so these are involved in movement. Now you see there's an actin binding site on the head of the myosin. The term I like to use is that they hook up. They actually will form a little connection. Now that's what's going to happen to make them kind of slide across each other. And so here is the actin, and notice in figure 9.3, actin is like twisted beads. You see the yellow things on it? There's a strand of tropomyosin and then these little yellow troponins. And what they do is they cover up the binding site most of the time. So actin and myosin can't hook up. It's very sad. So what's going to need to happen, that we'll see later, is something is going to have to move the troponin, tropomyosin off of that binding site so those two can hook up. And guess what it's going to be? You probably haven't read ahead. Has anybody read ahead to see what moves troponin and tropomyosin?
Nope.
Calcium. Calcium. Yeah, calcium is going to be surprising us all semester long and next semester as well. All right, so this is the part really that you'll want to read back over and just kind of get a feel for when we're going into the sliding filament theory. We're going to be talking about and using some of the pictures that are in the PowerPoints to kind of understand conceptually what's going on. Let me go ahead and flip over to this picture, which is figure 9.5. So the pictures are, I think, are incredibly helpful, because you see on the left-hand side of the picture, you've got that that muscle fiber, and then you see the myofibril kind of sticking out there. And then the sarcomere is what is in the foreground there, the one that's right in the center. And so the blue is that sarcoplasmic reticulum, and it contains calcium. And then the upright white structures, those are what we call the T-tubules. And what'll happen is when the stimulus happens, the calcium would get released from those blue things and travel down the T tubules and kick the whole sliding filament thing into motion. So this is a lot, once again, all at once, which is good that you've got the week to listen to the podcasts that I have posted on Moodle and to look over the pictures to kind of let it sink in a little bit. Now, what we see here is they talk about muscle contraction and the sliding filament model. Now, check out figure 9.61. Down at the bottom, so the top picture is actually a scanning, or actually a transmission electron micrograph, and it's multiplied many tens of thousands of times, probably up to 100,000 times, to show you those filaments. And the picture below, I think, actually helps you understand what's going on here. So this is before contraction. The Z discs are the upright portions, and that's the part where I said if you stick your thumbs up in the air, those would be like the Z discs. The H zone is also called the bear zone, and right now it's relaxed. So remember what's going to need to happen to contract. We're going to need those Z discs to come together. We're going to need those actins to overlap, and then the H zone in the middle is going to disappear. And that's what happens in this picture. So kind of flip back and forth between the two pictures if you can, and if not, I'm doing it, so yay. And this is how the sliding filament theory is going to work. Now, the way it moves has to do with the fact that myosin, its head is cocked. And when it hooks up with actin, it actually releases the ATP, and then it slides. And then the ATP will need to be recocked afterwards. And so that is going to be, so they talk about the different channels. I'm going to skip past those channels and actually check out this picture. Figure 9.7 shows us what they call a motor unit, which is an area where you've got the axons coming in contact with the muscle fibers. The term you use for where they really come in contact is called a neuromuscular junction. So neuro means nervous, muscular meaning muscle, and junction meaning this is where they come together. And this is reminding us that, especially with skeletal muscle, you can see that it's going right there in the bicep, right? And so what happens is that you tell your brain, I'm going to lift up my device and read my text. And so then it does it because the brain sends a signal to the nerves, which then stimulates the muscles and tell them to contract. So here is a great picture in figure 9.7. So that top yellow thing is an axon terminal, and terminal means end. And then below you see the sarcolemma of the muscle. That is the junction. Now, does it look like that they are directly connected to each other? Does it look like, is it like those intercalated discs, or is there a space? Not everybody at once. What do you think? Who votes for space?
Space.
There we go. The final frontier. No, wait. That's another thing. Synaptic cleft is the space. You got it. So what's interesting is that the nerve doesn't come into direct contact with the muscle. It's right next to it. It's really T distance. But those little green balls that are going across from the nerve to the muscle are neurotransmitters. And here is the name of the neurotransmitter. I will ask you this. Or acetylcholine. I've heard it pronounced both ways. I don't care how you pronounce it. The way to spell it is big A, big C, little h. Remember that that is the neurotransmitter at the neuromuscular junction. I assure you I will ask that. So what's going to happen is the nerve signal is going to come down the neuron. It's going to be electrical. And then it's going to signal to those little synaptic vesicles, hey, time to exocytose. And then what they're going to do is they're going to spew their contents into that synaptic cleft, and notice that they go over and bind with the receptors on the sarcolemma. So it goes from electrical to chemical, and then the next thing that'll happen is it's going to become electrical again. So the big picture here is they mentioned that the neuromuscular junction, the signal is going to come down, and that is the electrical signal. Then what will happen is the signal is going to go across because of the neurotransmitter, that chemical signal, and the muscle fiber will get excited. That's number 2 in the big picture. Now, that term that we're going to see next, excitation, contraction, coupling, really is talking about those events. First, it's an electrical event that is going to result in a contraction event. Cross-bridge cycling is a fancy expression for when actin and myosin hook up as a result, which will result in the contraction. So there is a figure here that has an overview, but let's just look at our friend, the neuromuscular junction. Oh yeah, this is just what we need in the morning, huh? So I hope you had your coffee or whatever beverage will you a little bit in the morning, orange juice, whatever. Events at the neuromuscular junction. So 2 things. First, we had that action potential, but then I want to show you something else. Here's another role of calcium, because who can have too many? Calcium is part of what signals for those synaptic vesicles to go and spew acetylcholine into the synapse. So there's calcium. You see it in the picture there, and they actually mention it in number 2 about calcium gated channels. So calcium is needed for exocytosis. We're going to see calcium again, because what happens is, first, now that the acetylcholine is bound to the membrane of the muscle cell, it can result in, and there is a video for this, but I'm not going to play it. It's going to result in a wave of depolarization. So figure 9.8, that big arrow going to the right, is showing us the wave. Now, depolarization, remember, is when you have a change in the membrane current. And as it depolarizes, it's going to convert into an action potential. You see that in figure 9.8, number 2 there up at the top. So the interesting thing is that not only can nerves create an action potential, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but muscle is the only other tissue in the body that can generate an action potential. Repolarizing just resets things back up. So this figure 9.2 is probably the last one we're going to go over today, because I think this is a lot to do kind of on your own, and I will guide you through it as best I can. And once again, if you have questions, especially Thursday when we get back together, if you're reading through it and you still are stuck on anything, that I'll open up the beginning of the session to questions you can have. So this is the figure we're going to spend time on, because if you remember the picture with the blue stuff over top of your sarcomere, when that signal comes down, and this is excitation, contraction, coupling, what it'll do is open up the floodgates for yet more calcium. And calcium is going to be what exposes the binding site on the actin, so actin and myosin can get together. And so that is what this figure 9.2 shows us. And that is the big take-home message of it. All right, so in this figure, which is 9.3, that cross-bridge cycle, what we see happening is, first, we have the relaxed phase. And then what we see is that you can't have actin and myosin kind of doing their thing yet. Calcium is going to come in and push off the binding site. And check out between number 1 and 2 there. What do you see happening? Well, the energy created by when ATP breaks down causes that myosin head to move. And where are the arrows going? To the left. So calcium exposing the sites will result in movement, and then ATP is released. So what will need to happen, and this we'll see later on in the chapter, is that we're going to need to take that ADP and rephosphorylate it later. But we'll get to that later. And so here's the movement. So key points of this cross-bridge cycle. Calcium comes in, pushes the troponin, tropomyosin complex off. Then what will happen is that big power stroke is what they call it. When ATP and myosin hook up, you can make this as racy as you want to remember it. And then it glides. And this is the sliding filament theory. This is the contraction part. And then what needs to happen is ATP needs to kind of recock that head. Needs to recock that head. And that happens to kind of reset the cycle. So I think that's enough for today. This is the first PowerPoint, and we get through the second PowerPoint. And like I said, the third PowerPoint goes way too much into things like smooth muscle, which is kind of premature. We haven't really gotten to that stuff yet. So we'll cover that more in AP2. So once again, I will be in touch with you guys via email. Make sure that you got your email access. And I will be trying to email you back information about your individual quizzes. So I'm going to be getting a hold of all of you sometime in the next day or so. And if you got a perfect score and you have it on your desktop, then let me know. Send me an email back so that I don't go through scanning yours in addition. For those of you who handwrote them, I think you'll want copies of it. So that's why I'm going to attempt to scan it. And like I'm telling my students in my other classes, if you don't have something that scans at home, most of us have devices that can take a picture. So if you ever need to take a picture of anything and send it to me, that's okay. You can send that over email. And once again, I have to create your guys' Dropbox. I will also be working on an open book version of your test, which I've never given one for AP1, so this is going to be really exciting. I know other instructors have timed exams online. I think they're torturous, but the part about an open book is there'll be part of it that'll be straightforward, which is kind of the objective part. The discussion part will be a little bit more, because you have the book open and you have resources, I'm going to allow you more time. So April 2nd was the date, but I think what I'll do is I'll allow you a day or so to do it. So I'm still working that out in my head. So are you guys doing okay?
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to figure out how to share this information that we had today for those who weren't able to drop in. Great to see so many of you here today.
Miss you.
Yeah, I miss you guys too. This home alone. Well, I'm not home alone. I've got my family and I got my dog who likes to bark when I'm doing Zoom. Although today he's kind of quiet, which is lucky. But it's very exciting. Yeah, I'm hoping we will see each other again before the end of the semester. But stay safe in the meantime and hydrate. All the stuff that and if you have to go out, goodness knows I hope you don't. But make sure that you protect yourself and also wash up. I think we all need to do little walks around the yard and stuff like that to get fresh air. That's okay as long as you're not breathing in someone else's face. Yeah, stay healthy, everybody. And I'm glad.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
This is Natasha Pearson. I didn't hear, did you say how we can find out what we got on our test?
I'm going to be emailing you. And if you don't get an email, then email me. I'm going to be trying to either scan or, I want to get these quizzes back to you somehow. And I can't physically bring them to you, so I'm in the process of what I'll do is I'll email if you did great on the quiz and it's one that you probably have on your desktop. I'll say, like, on question number 5, you needed to write this, but other than that, your quiz was perfect.
Okay.
And if for some reason you accidentally deleted your quiz, then I can just scan the copy for you. For people,
Okay, I have mine.
I'm going to need to scan it because there's no other way to do it. And then I'll probably still type in comments because I know you guys can't always read my handwriting. That hasn't changed.
Okay.
but anyway, yeah, so that is my plan. So stay tuned. Keep checking your emails. Be a little OCD about checking to see when you hear from me, because I'll be kind of I'm not planning the times I'm going on email. I'm kind of doing it when I can. And so far it seems like you guys did great with the first Zoom session. I'm really happy that it went okay. I have slightly bad hair, but that's okay. I think, we're all a little forgiving at this.
That's all right.
Stuff.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. And I am going to log us out of this and try to save this and share it with you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Be well.